Ben Friedman is Policy Director at Defence Priorities. That's a US foreign policy think tank that advocates for a more restrained American military strategy and reduced overseas interventions. Welcome back to DW. We're now more than 24 hours on since Donald Trump said there had been productive talks with Iran. We're still seeing Israeli strikes on Tehran and a denial from Iran that any talks have taken place. What's your reading of this? Do you see Washington and Tehran actively seeking an off-ramp?
I certainly see Washington seeking one, and I think President Trump is likely exaggerating what are back-channel indirect connections with the Iranians, where there's been some talk about conditions of a potential ceasefire or end to the war, but nothing very formal. The Iranians, I think, feel that although they've suffered a lot in this war, that they're on the front foot in the sense that the oil and energy situation means that Trump feels he needs a way out, a solution, and that they can demand a lot. So I don't think even the kind of deal on nuclear weapons that was available before the war will still be available. I think the terms that Trump would have to agree to are going to be much worse than what would have been the case before the war if he is seeking some real agreement to end the war.
That's interesting. You think that Iran's position has been strengthened by this war?
Yes, the Iranians feel that it's been strengthened, certainly, and they, I think, are correct in that Trump has revealed the limits, I think, of what the United States can accomplish militarily. He's shown through failure that the regime change fantasies that he harbored, encouraged by the Israelis, are wrong. And Iran has shown what I think most experts already thought, which was that it can withstand a lot of damage, and the government will continue to function and continue to run its economy. So it's, I think, the case that Iran is in a better negotiating position than they were prior to the war, even though they've suffered a lot of damage.
Even if Washington and Tehran did a deal, would Israel necessarily consider itself bound to stop attacking?
No. I mean, I think the real problem here is that, let's say there's a deal that would end the war. We need Israel to come along with it. Otherwise, there's no guarantee that the Iranians would have any reason to hold up their end or agree to it in the first place if the Israelis don't agree to stop. And I think there's another option here, which is that the United States doesn't need a formal deal to end the war. I don't think we really need anything from the Iranians, not on nukes, not on missiles. All that was sort of unnecessary propaganda to get us into the war. The one thing we do need is to solve a problem that we created with the war, which is to get oil shipments flowing again. So I think if the United States were to stop its end of the war, the Iranians might agree, even if they don't do so formally, to stop attacking oil shipments sooner or later, but not if the Israelis are still attacking them. So what's needed, I think, is that the President Trump, be willing to do something he hasn't really been willing to do heretofore, which is to lean on the Israelis and pressure them, not just rhetorically, but pressure them by potentially withholding aid and other forms of protection we give them unless they go along with us on this. So I think that's what it will take to end the war, not an agreement on nukes, which is unlikely because the war has driven Iran away from that, but a effort to control the Israelis so that we can get oil flowing again.
All right, and why hasn't that happened? Why are we talking about back-channel US Iran talks rather than back-channel US, Iran and Israel talks? If it needs all of these three parties to be bound into this, why are only two parties apparently talking?
Well, the Israelis are much more aggressive and fond of this war than the American side. And as the Trump administration has admitted, they more or less the Trump administration was pushed into the war by the Israelis for fear that, U.S. troops would be attacked when the Israelis launched their attack. So the Trump administration, like the Biden administration, has proven unwilling to take a hard line with the Israelis and threaten them with taking away things that we give if they don't go along with what we ask. In the Biden administration's case, it was on Gaza. In this case, it's far more important because it's a war that we're in. There's a lot of political reasons for that, but the bottom line is we haven't had a president, President Trump, who's willing to do it.
Right. Let's go back to the Strait of Hormuz, which, if I read you correctly, you think is the key to America looking for peace in this. It's easy for armchair generals to look at a map, look at Google Maps and say, well, any fool could have seen this coming. Why wasn't the United States ready for it? Now, you're a learned defense policy analyst. What would be your answer to that question?
Well, any fool could have seen it coming. Unfortunately, the president of the United States is not even that kind of fool. I mean, the security studies community in the United States, the foreign policy establishment, the United States military has been preoccupied for decades with the concept or the fear that in the event of a war with Iran, they would attack shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. We never made them desperate enough to exercise that threat. But what they're doing now is something most people always understood they could do and that they would do if we put a gun to their head in the way that we have. Because it's really the best leverage they have to actually affect regular Americans. I mean, they don't have missiles that can hit the United States. Bases in the Middle East, yes, but not the United States. They didn't have an active nuclear weapons program, contrary to everything the Trump administration claimed. It was largely destroyed and wasn't necessarily being weaponized in any event. So they weren't really a threat to us. So by attacking them, however, we created a real problem, which is we caused them to go after oil shipments and drive up prices and create real economic problems all over the world. And why Trump didn't anticipate that, I'm sure he was briefed on the possibility by his military aides, but he chose to dismiss it, I guess out of arrogance or because he's listened to the wrong people or because he didn't think it was that serious a problem. I'm not really sure. But the bottom line is it was obviously going to be a problem and he ignored it anyway.
Do you find it surprising that even as the speculation about talks to end this war increases, there has been a distinct lack of discussion about what comes next?
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to drive some discussion there myself in writing, but I think, the media and the administration, for natural reasons, are focused on the here and now, on the tactics and course of the war. But obviously, in any kind of peace, even if it's not a peace deal, it's just a de facto peace. You need to get there. You need to think through what the conditions are going to be. So what comes next is always a vital question in the course of making a war. I think it's another indictment of the Trump administration that they don't seem to have thought that through very clearly before launching this war. And for my part, I just think it's important that more people in the United States and Europe recognize that what we need from Iran is quite small. We don't need a different government there. We don't need them to forswear missiles or not even necessarily nuclear weapons. What we need from them is to basically be a status quo power that leaves shipping and oil shipments alone so that our prices aren't affected. That's really it. And we can certainly achieve that. I don't think it's very hard, but the war has made it a real problem and harder to achieve rather than getting us closer to a deal.
Okay, so, neither of us is in the room, but your assessment of the situation is a deal gets done. The Oval Office plan then would be, well, win the war, walk away, back to business as usual.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I'm not sure they've thought about it more than that. I think that I hope at least that they're starting to think about how they're going to manage the Israelis in particular, so that even if the war ends, it doesn't start again in 6 months. I mean, of course, this is arguably phase 3 of this war that the Israelis initiated with some strikes on the Iranians, and then their follow-up strikes in June, which the United States joined in a limited way, and now this is the third and by far the most violent phase. So I'd like for the United States to get off this train that the Israelis are driving. So, what comes next has to include rethinking our relationship with Israel. So at least we're not being dragged into wars that they prefer to have with our firepower doing most of the work.
Good talking to you. Thanks for talking us through that so clearly. Ben Friedman from Defense Priorities. Thank you.
Thanks.